In the last year, an alarming 1 in 4 teachers considered leaving the profession. This is largely due to teacher burnout and a lack of support for teacher well-being.
What does well-being look like for us? What's our vision of well-being? What is it that we would like as a thriving school community?
In this episode, we'll define what well-being is and how you as a leader can cultivate it in your school. Let's jump into my conversation with Helen Street.
It's an odd thing, well-being. I think any topic that is talked about within a sort of professional sense in psychology, but also in an everyday sense, you could talk about well-being with your neighbour at any moment, is open to ambiguity. So I suppose the first misconception really is that we all share the same understanding of what well-being is. So it's not to say that there's any specific definition that is the absolute right one and all the rest are wrong, but rather it's really important that when we're thinking about well-being within, say, the system of our school or our community or our family, that we're all on the same page with understanding what we're talking about. Beyond that, then I think it's really important to understand how we might support well-being. And even with a shared understanding, there's not necessarily going to be a shared understanding of how best to support it. And that's probably where I think the bigger misconceptions come into play.
So can you dig a little bit into the different facets of kind of a holistic definition for well-being?
I like to consider that as much as individuals, we experience well-being within us in a unique way. We create well-being in the spaces between us. So well-being is built in our relationships, but not just the relationships we have with other people, although those are absolutely incredibly important. It's also the relationships we have within the sort of the norms and the rules of the groups to which we belong. This is whether they are small groups within a classroom or a family, or large groups within a society or a culture, and our sense of place as well. And it's about how we connect to these different aspects of our world, our socially created world, and how that world connects to us and supports our needs. So in that sense, we can say that well-being is sort of epitomized by the sense of having a sense of belonging, which really is about having genuine, authentic connections within your social groups so that you feel accepted for who you are as part of the group. And it's also about engagement. So it's also about connection to the things that you do. And within that comes competency and progress and a sense of adventure and excitement, purpose, hope for the future. So that's a sort of more of a sense of well-being that continues across time. In that sense, you could simply say that well-being is about the experience of belonging and engagement, but comes from many factors, and it's made of many factors that support both of those things.
The School Leaders Project is brought to you by Toddle, your all-in-one teaching and learning platform made for teachers and by teachers. We started as a passion project in a school that thought that teaching tech should be as innovative as teaching teams, and we're now loved by more than 1,500 progressive K-12 schools all around the world. I love it. Okay, so you said earlier in the show that it's about getting a shared definition of what wellness is, which I feel pretty on board with. So then the second piece of it, then you said, is how we actually implement well-being in our schools.
Yes.
And your system for this is your book, is contextualized well-being. So is that more of, if I were to read that book, is that a system for how to do it as a leader?
So if we can start to think about this connected systemic view, it's about how we connect with and relate to each other and how we meet the needs of each other within a social setting. Then that shifts us to thinking about the framework in terms of how we might best support that. And that naturally leads us to consider how the system operates. So rather than thinking, for example, oh my gosh, I've got so much staff stress, I'm going to make sure we do mindfulness Mondays and have drinks on Fridays, which can seem quite tokenistic and sort of minimalizing what it means to be well as an educator. Not that those things aren't lovely, but instead it sort of shifts our attention to think, okay, let's look at how the system works for my staff. Are their core needs being satisfied? Do they have autonomy in their lives? Do they feel safe to speak out? Do they have good peer support and good support both up and down hierarchies of leadership? And do they have a sense of ongoing competency, or are they left sort of like forever anxious about their performance and keeping up with a overcrowded curriculum? So it that sort of broader sense of an understanding of well-being as the spaces between us, as within the context, our contextual well-being allows us to then think about the best way to support well-being by addressing how the system is meeting the needs of those within it and how it's doing that equitably. So in many schools, there's going to be students who have a huge sense of autonomy, who have great relationships and feel very competent, but often at the expense of other students having none of those needs met. So until we sort of take a more equitable approach to meeting the needs of young people and see that as a priority in supporting their well-being, everybody suffers.
That's so beautiful, Helen. And I love a framework. So might I ask, if I'm a leader and I'm just thinking about exploring these questions of the context of my school?
Yes.
Is there a starting place that you typically...
Yes.
So where do you begin?
Absolutely. And I totally understand that by thinking philosophically or thinking about meaning and purpose, it can feel woolly or hard to think, I don't know what actually concrete you need to do now. So to think about that to start off with, it's important that you have a shared understanding, and that shared understanding of what wellbeing is needs to be broadly thinking about defining wellbeing, and I encourage people to think about that from a social point of view. But from that, it's about thinking as a shared group of people within a school to think about, well, what does that look like in action? What are some of the times that you feel things are happening in your classroom to meet the needs of students, or in your staff room to meet the needs of staff, things that resonate with you, things that where you feel that your needs are being met? Then from that, to start to create a sense of, well, what would the ideal school look like? So there's always going to be pockets of great things happening in a school, but very often they're just not given priority, or they're just not broadened across the whole school, or they're not very deep. They're sort of moments without much unpacking and thought. I've never been to a school that doesn't have everything it needs to be a thriving community. It's just that those things are not formally prioritized and don't have the sort of understanding and buy-in from everybody. To create wellbeing framework is about sort of thinking about, well, what does wellbeing look like for us? What's our vision of wellbeing? What is it that we would like as a thriving school community in terms of that's equitable, that meets the needs of everybody? What works, and how can we now broaden and build what works? And in that process, how can we understand what's getting in the way? What are the barriers to success? What are the challenges? What are the things we might need to let go of? And I sort of put this emphasis on building on what's working as opposed to finding the problem we can solve, because it's energizing and it's inspiring, and it allows people to sort of like think about growth and progress and competency. If we go into a school and I say, let's look at what the problem you've got here and how we can change it, that's so sort of like exhausting before you've even begun. You know, people think, oh my gosh, you're telling me my last 20 years has been wrong, or I've got to change, or, and I'm already so busy. How can I do it differently? So to think about growth and progression and bringing out the best is a way to help keep your staff on board with an ongoing process of development.
So just to kind of summarize your framework, what I'm hearing is co-constructing a definition of what does wellness look like for us, grounded in belonging and engagement. From there, identifying what are we doing well, what's working, what's giving us that sense of belonging and engagement. And then making that systemic and equitable is really the work there.
Yes.